Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's TSP2 Bridge Preservation webinar. My name is Dan Muller, and I am the Bridge Engineer for the Federal Highway Administration in North Carolina Division Office, and I will be the moderator for today's panel. Today's topic is the impact of COVID-19 and budget restrictions on bridge inspection and bridge preservation programs. Here we have today's agenda. We've got 6 folks here from around TSP2 who you probably are familiar with, who are willing to talk about how COVID-19 has impacted their panels, their states, their agencies, their companies. And just going to go ahead and get started. Our first speaker is Tom Pechillo, who is the Bridge Department Manager, Senior Project Manager, and a Principal at BL Companies. Tom will present some remarks on the impact on private sector preservation practitioners from the perspective of a consulting engineering firm.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Dan. Once again, Tom Pechillo with BL Companies, and I'm happy to be here today to give you our perspective on how COVID-19 has impacted the consulting engineering industry. Just by way of demographics, BL, if you're not familiar with us, we're about a 330-person engineering and architectural firm located in the Northeast. So we're in that sort of mid-sized firm category. And I had a little bit of help. I did reach out to a multinational engineering firm that's headquartered in the US, as well as a local DBE firm that's headquartered in New England, to kind of gain the broader perspective of how it's impacted the industry as a whole. I'm going to look back on the past 7 months, kind of walk you through how it's impacted our industry, and try to look ahead to what we think the future might hold for us and gaze into our crystal ball a little bit. Our work model at BL, we had mandatory work from home from about mid-March until Labor Day, and we've had a voluntary return to the office after Labor Day, adhering to all of the state's capacity limits for the offices in which we work. I would say we've had about a 10% return to the office on a voluntary basis, and others in the office sort of more sporadically. While we're working remotely, most of us have laptops with VPN connections to our servers. Our CAD users use remote desktop. Of course, extensive use of video calls. We use a platform called Ring Central, which is basically Zoom for professionals. We've placed an emphasis on more team check-ins. Prior to the pandemic, I was checking in with my team once a week, and now it's at least twice a week, with more one-on-one calls as needed. The large firm reported in that same time period, they were allowing employees in the office on a limited basis. Typically, they had 5 to 10% of their staff in the office. They're reporting no mandatory return to work expected this year, and that's the case for us as well. Each of their offices created a workplace readiness plan that was reviewed and approved by senior management and presented to all their employees, and they use Teams for their video calls. The DBE firm, they were also mandatory work from home from March until September, with just a couple of exceptions, as you see there. Since September, they're reporting about a 20% voluntary return to the office. They do use remote desktop. They actually invested in their employees, and they purchased printers and cameras for their employees' use at home. So really, they went kind of above and beyond for their employees' convenience. And they use, of course, Teams and Zoom, as most of us do. Our safety protocols, and I think this is typical for a lot of the firms that I've spoken with, when we go in the office, it's mandatory. We have to take our temperature, the typical hand washing, frequent sanitizing, social distancing. We have to wear masks in the office 100% of the time, even if we're in a closed door office by ourselves, because of the uncertainty of how long airborne particles linger. The next person in the room may be subjected to some aerosols. We do sign in and out for contact tracing. We have had, obviously, travel restrictions with particular attention paid to the quarantines initiated by some states, and of course, restrictions in attending events in person. For field work, we do lots of bridge inspection, construction inspection, survey, and environmental work. We've mandated, in addition to all the protocols we observe in the office, field people have to travel separately in separate vehicles. I say sanitizing vehicles and equipment is basically wiping down common surfaces, doorknobs and steering wheels and door handles and equipment and so forth. On a project basis, I would say we've done really well executing projects remotely, as have the other consultants I've spoken with. Our projects, most of them have continued, be they bridge inspection, bridge design, construction inspection, and so forth. We're finding that the paperwork is becoming more electronic. Certain clients were requiring wet signatures prior to the pandemic, and now they're accepting electronic signatures. Things like invoices, bridge inspection reports, and what have you. Virtual meetings have been a success. So the projects have been executed really successfully, and I would say, on time, on budget, really no differently than prior to the pandemic, which was really encouraging for us. Business development has been obviously more challenging. It used to be that you could just drop in on a client. Obviously, we can't do that now. We're scheduling more video calls, but they're sort of purpose-oriented rather than more socially oriented, I would say. We do have virtual coffees we've done. We've had isolated in-person meetings, but those have been sort of rare. One of the things that the DVE consultant pointed out that has made our lives easier is we've been able to do increased attendance at remote virtual meetings. For example, the upcoming AASHTO annual meeting is all virtual. And really, for a lot of firms, the travel to that is cost prohibitive, but now we're able to attend that in the virtual environment. So that's been one positive that's come out of it. The other challenging aspect of things has been staff development. As I said, we've been executing projects really well, but staff have generally been home in the bubble that is their house. For example, pre-pandemic, my bridge group works back to back with an environmental group. So one of my bridge engineers could overhear a conversation that centers around environmental permitting and learn something, or even another bridge engineer talking about a different project. And likewise, conversely, all of that is really gone in the virtual environment, or the remote environment, I should say. So really, we're trying to place a greater emphasis on check-ins, and including social check-ins. All of the firms that I've spoken with are really either continuing or initiating virtual leadership training, trying to encourage some staff to come back to the office on some days to meet on an individual basis. Looking ahead is obviously more challenging than looking in the past, but it looks like most of the firms do not anticipate a full 100% of the time return to the offices, seeing as the projects have been able to execute successfully remotely. We're looking at hybrid models, a mix of remote and office employees, shared workspaces for the folks that are coming back to the office on a part-time basis. All of that is under discussion, and of course, with the premium on real estate, we're anticipating, and I say by we, really the industry, looking to really shrink real estate. Safety protocols, I say to be determined. That's fairly obvious. We don't really know what the pandemic is going to look like after the fact. I would say my personal opinion is most people, both in our industry and certainly globally, are going to give a little more consideration to sanitizing and really doing those common sense sort of things during cold and flu season, even once we get past the COVID issue. Looking ahead, as far as projects go, obviously there's concern in our industry overall about long-term transportation funding. All of the states have seen a sharp decline in gas tax and toll revenues. Really, there's a lot of struggles for at least some states to meet their federal match on their existing projects. We are obviously in an election year. The political climate could influence, a future transportation bill. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. And then the last bullet point, I'd be remiss. We are, after all, a bridge preservation partnership, and we've always talked about doing more with less with bridge preservation. And we may have to do even more with even less going forward. Business development side, from our perspective, a lot of question marks. like us, we don't know to what extent our clients are going to return to their offices and to what extent they're going to accept visitors. In-person networking events, of course, we're all hopeful. I do sit on the board of the Northeast Bridge Preservation Partnership, and we're looking to hold our meeting in person next year, as are, I understand, the other partnerships. But I think there is some uncertainty regarding that. So we're hopeful to get back to in-person events, but we're not really sure. And then how to manage and develop relationships as we move forward. If we're really only seeing each other virtually, a lot of us have had long-standing in-person relationships, client to consultant, consultant to client. What does that look like if you've only met your client virtually going forward, or you've only met your consultant virtually? A little less certain. And finally, I mentioned one of our major challenges is staff development. So some things we've talked about looking ahead are, frequent in-person check-ins, coaching sessions, in-house development training, cross-training with other disciplines, lunch and learns, things like that. I gave that bridge group and environmental group example. Perhaps, we can do a lunch and learn and do a bridge 101 and have all of our other disciplines listen in to sort of get a feel for what we do and what the primary considerations are for bridges. And likewise, other groups could do that for permitting and hydraulics and traffic and other disciplines, and we could learn a little something too. So that's sort of, what I had as far as my presentation goes.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.